My name is Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and history knows me as the Prussian drill master who transformed a ragged collection of farmers into the army that defeated the British Empire. But what you may not know is that when I arrived at Valley Forge on that frozen February morning in 1778, I witnessed something that defied everything I had learned in the courts of Friedrich the Great. I saw men who had no right to survive, much less win a war, clinging to a dream so powerful that it sustained them through conditions that would have broken the finest regiments of Europe. These were not professional soldiers. They were shopkeepers, blacksmiths, and farmers who had chosen liberty over comfort, sacrifice over surrender. I came to America with embellished credentials, claiming to be a lieutenant general when I had only risen to captain in the Prussian service, but what I lacked in rank, I possessed in knowledge of military discipline. The Continental Congress, weary of foreign mercenaries demanding high pay and higher titles, was skeptical of yet another European officer arriving with grand promises. But General George Washington saw something in me that others did not. He saw a man who understood that warfare was as much science as courage, and that an army without discipline was merely a mob with muskets. The journey to Valley Forge tested my resolve before I ever reached the encampment. I sailed from France in late 1777, having been introduced to Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane by the Comte de Saint-Germain, the French Minister of War, who recognized the value of Prussian training methods. I spoke no English, only German and French, which meant I would need to transform an army while communicating through translators. My secretary, Pierre-Etienne Duponceau, became my voice, translating my commands and my frustrations, and there would be many frustrations, into the language these Americans could understand. When I arrived at Valley Forge on February 23, 1778, General Washington himself rode out to meet me, a gesture that spoke to the desperate circumstances facing the Continental Army. The camp sprawled across a plateau northwest of Philadelphia, a natural fortress that provided defensive advantage but little else. What I saw that day would have sent any European general fleeing back to the comfort of civilization. Men huddled in crude log huts, many without proper shoes, their feet wrapped in rags that left bloody tracks in the snow. The smell of disease and death hung over the encampment like a shroud. Of the 11,000 men who had marched into Valley Forge in December, thousands were too weak or too sick to stand, much less fight. Smallpox ravaged the camp, and the specter of starvation loomed over every meal of fire cake, a mixture of flour and water cooked over open flames that barely sustained life. Yet even in this misery, I saw something that stirred my soldier's heart. These men had not deserted, they had not mutinied, though they had every reason to do so. The Continental Congress had failed to provide adequate supplies, pay, or even acknowledgement of their service. The surrounding countryside, exhausted by years of war, could spare little for the army's needs. British forces occupied Philadelphia, the rebel capital, in comfort and warmth just 20 miles away, while the army that claimed to defend American liberty shivered in the wilderness. But these Americans possessed something that could not be issued like muskets or uniforms. They possessed an unshakable belief in their cause. When I inspected the troops, one soldier later recalled that I appeared to him as the ancient god of war, Mars himself. My ornate uniform, my jeweled medallions, the enormous holsters on my horse, all created an impression of martial grandeur that stood in stark contrast to the rags these men wore. But appearances meant nothing if they could not be backed by results. Washington appointed me temporary Inspector General and gave me a mission that would determine whether the Continental Army could survive to fight another season. I was to observe, assess, and transform these troops into soldiers capable of facing British regulars in open battle. My first inspection revealed the depth of the challenge. The Continental Army had no standardized drill, no common manual of arms, no uniform system of training. Each regiment followed the methods taught by its officers, many of whom had never seen formal military service. Some companies loaded and fired their muskets in 8 steps, others in 12, still others in methods that defied logic entirely. The bayonet, that essential tool of 18th century warfare, was viewed with such suspicion that soldiers used it primarily to roast meat over campfires. The American soldier, I quickly learned, had never been taught to trust the cold steel, and so he never used it except in the most desperate circumstances. This would not do. The British excelled at bayonet charges, and without proper training, the Continental troops would break and run at the sight of advancing redcoats with fixed bayonets. I began my work immediately, though not in the way European officers typically approached training. In Prussia, soldiers were drilled through fear and punishment, beaten into submission until they performed movements through terror rather than understanding. But I recognized that the American character would not respond to such methods. These men were volunteers, not conscripts. They had joined the army of their own free will, motivated by principles of liberty and self-governance that made them question orders they did not understand. Where a Prussian soldier would accept a command without thought, an American soldier wanted to know why the task must be performed. This fierce independence could have been a weakness, but I chose to make it a strength. I selected approximately 120 men to form a model company, drawn from various regiments to ensure that the training would spread throughout the army. These men would learn directly from me, and they in turn would train others, creating a cascade of knowledge that would transform the entire force. Every morning, regardless of weather, I would take this model company to the parade ground and drill them relentlessly. I taught them to march in step, to maintain formation under pressure, to execute commands with precision and speed. The loading and firing of the musket, that complex dance of powder and ball that could mean the difference between victory and death, I simplified from the cumbersome 12 or even 15-step procedures used by various regiments into an efficient 9-step method that could be executed under the stress of battle. But the language barrier presented constant challenges. I would bark commands in German, which Duponceau would translate into French, which another translator would render into English, by which time my precise military terminology had often become muddled and imprecise. In my frustration, I would sometimes lapse into German curses that needed no translation. Their meaning was clear in my tone and gestures. The men found this amusing rather than intimidating, and I soon learned the most colorful phrases of English profanity, which I employed with great enthusiasm when drill did not meet my standards. Duponceau later recalled that I would sometimes shout, "My dear Duponceau, come and swear for me in English. These fellows won't do what I bid them." This informality, so different from the rigid hierarchies of European armies, created a bond between myself and these Americans. They saw that I suffered alongside them, that I demanded no comfort for myself that they did not share, and that I genuinely believed they could become the equals of any soldiers in the world. The bayonet training proved most difficult to implement. For generations, American colonists had relied on firearms for hunting and defense, developing marksmanship skills that exceeded those of most European soldiers. But they had never learned to fight with cold steel, to trust the bayonet as the ultimate arbiter of close combat. I taught them that the bayonet was not merely a weapon of last resort, but a tool of shock and awe, capable of breaking enemy formations through the sheer terror of its approach. I drilled them in bayonet charges until the movement became instinctive, until they could advance in perfect lines with leveled steel, maintaining formation even under fire. The Battle of Stony Point would later vindicate this training. American soldiers attacked a British fortification with unloaded muskets, winning the engagement entirely through bayonet tactics. That victory proved that the Continental Army had truly become professional soldiers, capable of executing complex maneuvers under the most challenging conditions. Throughout the brutal winter of 1778, I worked to instill discipline, while respecting the democratic spirit that made these Americans unique. I introduced proper camp hygiene, teaching soldiers to separate their living quarters from their latrines, to boil water before drinking, to air out their bedding to prevent the spread of disease. These simple measures, combined with Washington's controversial decision to inoculate the entire army against smallpox, dramatically reduced the death toll from illness. I standardized the rations, ensuring that what little food the army received was distributed fairly and prepared in ways that maximized its nutritional value. I reorganized the quartermaster system, working closely with General Nathaniel Greene, whom Washington appointed to solve the supply crisis. As spring approached, the transformation became visible to all. The soldiers moved with confidence now, their formations tight and responsive to commands. They could load and fire 3 volleys per minute, matching the rate of British regulars. They could reform lines under fire, execute flanking maneuvers, and conduct orderly retreats without dissolving into panic. Most importantly, they believed in themselves. They had endured Valley Forge, that crucible of suffering that should have destroyed them, and emerged stronger for the trial. When the army marched out of Valley Forge in June 1778, they were no longer the ragtag militia that had stumbled into winter quarters 6 months earlier. They were the Continental Army, disciplined, trained, and ready to prove their worth against the finest troops the British Empire could field. The first test came just 9 days after we departed Valley Forge. At Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey, on a scorching June day when the temperature exceeded 100 degrees, we encountered a British force under General Henry Clinton attempting to withdraw from Philadelphia to New York. The battle that followed demonstrated everything we had achieved during those frozen months of training. American troops stood toe-to-toe with British regulars, trading volleys in European-style linear warfare that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. When British forces attempted to flank our position, our soldiers executed precise counter-movements, reforming lines under fire with a discipline that shocked our enemies. The battle ended inconclusively in tactical terms, but strategically it was an American triumph. We had proven that the Continental Army could fight the British as equals, that the training at Valley Forge had created a military force capable of winning independence. My contributions to the American cause extended beyond drill and discipline. During the winter of 1778-1779, while the Army rested in its next encampment, I wrote the manual that would guide American military training for decades to come. Regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States, known informally as the Blue Book for its distinctive blue paper covers, codified everything I had taught at Valley Forge into a comprehensive guide for officers and soldiers alike. 164 pages of detailed instructions covering everything from the manual of arms to camp sanitation, from march formations to battlefield tactics. The Continental Congress approved the Blue Book in March 1779, and it remained the official drill manual of the United States Army until 1814, used throughout the War of 1812 as new generations of American soldiers learned the same lessons I had taught those freezing men at Valley Forge. General Washington, recognizing the value of my services, recommended that Congress confirm my appointment as Inspector General with the rank of Major General, which they did without hesitation. I continued to serve throughout the remainder of the war, though never again did I face a challenge quite like that first winter at Valley Forge. In 1780, Washington sent me south to assist General Nathaniel Greene, who faced the difficult task of rebuilding the Continental Army's southern forces after devastating defeats at Charleston and Camden. I helped train new recruits and reorganize shattered regiments, applying the same methods that had succeeded in the North. Later, I commanded a division at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, the climactic battle that effectively ended the war. Watching British General Cornwallis's troops march out to surrender on October 19, 1781, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. These Americans, who had seemed so hopeless just 3 years earlier, had defeated the greatest military power on Earth. They had endured hardships that would have broken professional armies, held together by nothing more than faith in their cause and in their commander, George Washington. The Continental Army won the Revolutionary War not through superior numbers or resources. We were always outnumbered, always undersupplied. We won through determination, through the ability to endure suffering without losing hope, through the leadership of men like Washington who inspired loyalty through personal example rather than fear. My role in this victory was to provide the technical expertise, the systematic training that transformed raw courage into military effectiveness. I gave these Americans the tools they needed to channel their passion for liberty into tactical success on the battlefield. After the war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, I chose to remain in America rather than return to Europe. The Continental Congress granted me American citizenship, and various states awarded me land grants in recognition of my service. I settled on a farm near Rome, New York, where I lived out my remaining years as an American citizen, proud to have played my part in the birth of this unprecedented nation. When Washington wrote his final letter to me as Commander-in-Chief in 1783, he thanked me for my faithful and meritorious services, words that meant more to me than all the titles and honors I had invented in my youth. I had come to America as an imposter, claiming ranks I had not earned, but I departed the Continental Army with genuine achievements that required no embellishment. The true measure of my success was not personal glory, but collective triumph, the transformation of Valley Forge from a symbol of despair into a testament to American resilience. Those bloody footprints in the snow, those crude log huts, that suffering that should have ended the rebellion, all became instead the forge where American military excellence was born. Every officer who studies at West Point, every soldier who drills on a parade ground, every unit that maintains discipline under fire, traces their lineage back to those freezing mornings at Valley Forge when I taught farm boys and shopkeepers to become the Continental Army. The lessons we learned in that crucible extend beyond military tactics. Valley Forge demonstrated that free men, motivated by principle rather than coercion, can achieve what conscripted armies cannot. It proved that leadership through respect and shared sacrifice creates stronger bonds than fear and punishment. It showed that the American spirit, that fierce independence that initially seemed like a weakness, was actually the source of their greatest strength. I have fought in the armies of Prussia under Friedrich the Great, served in courts across Europe, and witnessed warfare on 3 continents, but I never saw anything to match what those Americans accomplished. They created a new kind of army for a new kind of nation, one that would defend not the glory of a monarch, but the rights of free citizens to govern themselves. This was my gift to America. Not the drill manual or the training regimen, important though those were, but the belief that these principles of discipline and democracy could coexist, that soldiers could be both obedient to command and respectful of individual rights. The Continental Army became the model for the United States military, an institution that has defended freedom not just in America, but around the world for more than 2 centuries. When I died in 1794, just 11 years after the war ended, I was buried on my farm in New York with full military honors. Statues would later be erected in my honor at Valley Forge, in cities across America, even in Germany where my journey began. But my true monument is not bronze or marble, it is the United States Army itself. forged in the snows of Valley Forge according to principles I helped establish. Every American soldier who stands in formation, who maintains discipline under fire, who balances obedience with independent thought, carries forward the legacy of those desperate months when we transformed defeat into victory through training, dedication, and an unshakable commitment to the cause of liberty. This is my testament, the story of how a Prussian officer helped a nation of rebels become soldiers worthy of their revolution. I witnessed the birth of American military power, and I am honored to have served as midwife to that difficult delivery.